And hello, hello, hello.
Hello.
Like to welcome all. Thank you for joining us.
Yes.
I am STZ, and today I am joined with,
Spencer Tyler,
and together we are.
ministers there here at Healing for the Soul Ministry. The site, I just want to start off by saying, is healingforthesoulministry.wordpress.com. Is our blog there. You can find out what the particulars of our theological perspectives there, as well as articles about our reflections on being an ex-Jehovah's Witness. And as well as STZ, you have a men's corner.
Yeah, from time to time, hopefully more frequently, we'll be able to update that with some content that is not only meant for men, but especially edifying for men. But as we all know, every word in God's word, the Bible, is beneficial. So, again, all are welcome in STZ's Men's Corner.
Yes.
But men, you can turn there from time to time and make sure that there's something there that's timely in our lives.
We also have a section for Christian poetry and prayers, specifically for that. That's kind of my baby. We have a section that talks about ministries that we recommend and support groups. We have a support group online. You can find or check us out on Facebook. Both of those support groups are new. Our main groups are Healing and Recovery for Jehovah's Witnesses. Our second group is Healing for the Soul Ministry Prayer Group, where we submit prayers and we intercede on behalf for ex-Jehovah Witnesses, praying that the gospel reaches them, that the illumination of Christ shines through. One of the reasons why this ministry is so important to us is that it was birthed out of brokenness that we experienced as being being former Jehovah's Witnesses. It kind of blossomed out of our own seasons of brokenness. A lot of people will have questions about why we chose to do an audio video instead of a video, and why we use pseudonyms instead of our real names. And one of the reasons why we do that is because our ministry is specifically to ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, and it's very important that we maintain a measure of a privacy, because ex-Jehovah's Witnesses are a special group of people to witness to. You know, if they find out about your background or know certain things, they tend to shoot the messenger instead of listening to the message. And then there are other sensitive issues, you know, attending a church and starting your own fellowship. Although I'm excommunicated, it's a particular situation for STZ, who is inactive.
So it's kind of like a Candlestein ministry in bits. It's like Nicodemus coming to Jesus at nighttime. You know, sometimes as a witness, you don't necessarily feel comfortable and safe to come out all exposed. So hopefully we can provide a place that, first of all, that where you know that your privacy is respected,
Yes.
and that you are viewed as a welcome contributor, as a valued voice.
Yes.
And again, we're just here to share and to edify and to hope that our testimony can help you in some way.
So we are seasoned speakers for over 10 years. We've conducted ministerial training, coaching, and we've conducted private Bible studies in homes to train others to spread the gospel. We've visited hospitals and nursing homes in the past. We plan to visit mental institutions and even go to the streets to preach the gospel, and more of an evangelistic effort. So it's just our sincere desire to do whatever God has placed on our hearts for the ministry. So if you and your church would like to partner with our ministry, please contact us at healingforthesoulministry@gmail.com or healingforthesoulministryevents.wordpress.com. One of the reasons why we wanted to start this video, or begin a video, this is actually a series. The series is called Gracefully Breaking the Chains of the Generational Indoctrination of the Jehovah's Witnesses. And it kind of talks about our journey to the truth about the truth. It's one of the little monikers that we've kind of picked up along the way. We're newly inactive ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, I guess. We're
still figuring out what we're. I don't know what they will call us.
Right. We're definitely active. I'm excommunicated. Like, I guess we could talk about our background.
Okay, well, I'll start off. I'll give you a chance. My parents were baptized, dedicated witnesses, long before I was born. And being such, they raised me to be a witness. And my childhood was full of very Jehovah's Witness things. Of course, no birthdays, no holidays, no extracurricular school activities, things like that that would might possibly expose me to some spicy association. But even more life changing than that was the effect that it had on my personal life. As a child, I remember instead of spending Saturday mornings the way most other children spent them, I was stuffing into a snowsuit and heading out, to go from door to door ministry. 4 years old, and I was pushing my little brother in a stroller through snow. It was an experience. It was one that at the time I was younger. I actually cherished it. I actually valued it, and it was my life. I didn't think anything weird of it. Moving on, getting a little older, I decided to move up to a point where I wanted to start making the truth my own and start taking study a little bit more seriously. The problem that I ran into with that is that I had a lot of questions in the material I was reading. Not a lot of questions, but a few questions.
Right.
And whenever I bring it up to my father, who along the years was a ministerial servant, who was an elder, who was a presiding overseer, coordinator by the elders, he would always say, "Okay, I'll get back to you on that. Let me look it up. Let me do some research. I'll get back to you on that."
Right.
And his research that he got back to me with was always what I read originally in the Watchtower Library that used to confuse me. So I got a little bit frustrated. I didn't necessarily voice those frustrations aloud, personally, because I remember there was a time when my older brother did the same. And he mentioned there was a few things that he didn't understand and he didn't believe in. And my parents, they chose to have a personal study with him on top of our family study. And in this study, he studied the My Book of Bible Stories book. And we were, I think, in the Live Forever book at the time. So he was basically on a remedial Christian path. And it was humiliating to him spiritually, and a reminder to us other kids
to stay in line.
Yeah, and don't ask too many questions.
Right.
Or else, you get put back in the kindergarten book.
Right.
And speaking of that book, I'm sorry, this is a side now. Speaking of that book,
right.
I do remember many nights where my mother would play My Book of Bible Stories cassette tapes.
Yeah.
And just leave it on play. And we had this one machine, this tape recorder. I don't remember what kind it was. It had the auto rewind. So it would pop. Like after it was done playing, it would rewind. And then click. And then it was either somebody would hop up immediately and press it again, or hopefully we were asleep by that time. But every night, it reminds you almost of like an indoctrination, from a very, very, very early age.
Well, like an oppressive regime, like those oppressive regimes that exist today, that plays indoctrination shapes over, like North Korea.
Right. Yeah, we see
it's the same thing.
Exactly.
So how long would you say you've been inactive?
I would probably say about 4 or 5 years. It has been a slow pulling away because, as I mentioned, my family is still exemplary involved in the organization.
Very much involved.
And it has been, it's been difficult at times having a relationship with them, and them basically knowing that, hey, he's different. He's not trying to come to the meetings. He's not asking about the meetings anymore. He's not responding to my daily text thread. It's, and they are pioneers. They are career publishers, and so it's put a very large strain on my relationship with them, on their grandchildren's relationship with them. It's been far stretching. So, what about you? Why don't you share a little bit of your testimony?
So for me, I've been excommunicated for about 6 years, and that judicial meeting was terrifying and very life changing for me. That deserves a separate video altogether.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, it was horrifying. And I had a very unique experience, I believe, with the elders, but I do read a lot of other experiences, and I know that I'm not, entirely alone in my experience. But so I've been excommunicated for about 6 or 7 years. I grew up with both my mother and father, who were not born in Jehovah's Witnesses, but we're both second generation Jehovah's Witnesses. And
Thanks a lot, Mom.
right. So to talk a little bit about my experience, I was a regular pioneer. I auxiliary pioneer for many years before becoming a regular pioneer. I was on a fast track in the organization. My parents, perhaps if they would have poured in as much as they did in me in other pursuits such as college, which is strongly discouraged by Jehovah's Witnesses, and other, I probably would have been fast tracked on whatever it is I decided to do, but that's neither here or there. Yeah, but I was a regular pioneer. I started off in the theocratic ministry school when I was 6 years old. Once my mother got the so-called truth from another Jehovah's Witness who knocked on her door. At 8, I became a publisher. At 11, I was baptized, which again deserves a video of its own.
I'm sorry, how old again?
11. I was 11 years old. I started regular auxiliary pioneer the month after, and became a regular pioneer at 19.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll just leave it at that because I don't want to tell my age too much. But I began having doubts at a very young age. I actually remember having doubts about the 1914 doctrine and getting a spanking for not believing the 1914 doctrine. I remember having a very heated exchange with my father, who was very adamant about us studying, and was almost like a drill sergeant when it came to what we call personal study, which really amounts to just stacking a bunch of books on the sides of a desk and studying the material from the publications. And when I would compare it to even to their own Bible, it didn't make sense. And when I couldn't find 1914 in the complicated math,
right.
that and I was only probably like, I would put it every bit of 12 or 13. So math was, I'm not good at math anyway. So
right.
It was very complicated. And at some point, it just seemed, at a very young age, it seemed very convoluted. And it's almost amazing to me that 30 years later, after that the first witness that I had was from another Jehovah's Witness on my job, who knew that I had doubts about 1914, and I was recently excommunicated, and kind of snuck over there and kind of told me too. And from there, we just began a journey of trying to figure out the truth about what we were learning. And again, that just probably deserves a video of its own. We're trying to talk about our experience.
So how did you avoid becoming like atheist or agnostic?
I always had a sense of God from a very young age, and I do believe it was as a result of my parents. I could have dealt without the indoctrination of the governing body's teachings, but my parents didn't know any better. They weren't really religious people, and they were very uneducated and didn't have a lot of education. And that's kind of, as a side note, kind of seems like the kind of people that are drawn to this organization. How do you think your experience from the Jehovah's Witnesses shape your view of God? Like, so many ex-Jehovah's Witnesses or Jehovah's Witnesses, when they leave the organization because they equate God with the organization, they become atheists or agnostic or bitter and bitterly opposed to the organization. Even though we don't discourage activism because activism is important, but bitterly opposed to the organization to the point that it destroys you. Like, how did you? You didn't avoid it, I guess, but how did you work through that?
Well, first of all, the process is very gradual and ongoing, but
Probably took a lot longer than you
well,
really.
yeah, I wanted it to.
Right.
That's,
All longer than I thought.
that's definitely sure. But I guess initially the healing process started with me admitting a little bit that I was angry, a little
Yeah.
admitting that I was upset. I felt like my time was wasted. I felt at times as if I was born into a bad situation. I felt at times as though that Jehovah knew how much I loved him and he knew how much my heart was for him. Why would he allow me to be born
Right.
in a situation? Even some of the brothers individually, some of the way, spoken to through times through corrective processes or through judicial meetings, it was left wounds,
Yes.
and these wounds began to come to light when I examined them and examined the sources where they came from, and like I said, I had to admit to myself that I was hurt, I was angry. Then I had to understand that first of all, anger in itself is not a sin. You
Right.
know, the Bible tells us to in our anger not to sin. And so there were times when Jesus was angry.
Right.
So recognizing that was in itself healing. It allowed me not necessarily to become so consumed with it that I began to even doubt the existence or if there was a caring God, if he was really involved in my life as I thought he was. It recalled to mind. You ever remember going to Cedar Point, and there used to be these little old timey cars, and they were like go karts, and they used to go around a track.
Right.
They would go up a hill and down near the river and around the creek, but the thing about them is that down underneath the car there was basically a track system,
Yeah.
and this car could only go so far to the left. It could only go so far to the right. But to a kid, I mean, it was like driving. I couldn't believe they would give a 6-year-old, let us stand in line and drive it. So
Right.
thinking back on that as an illustration for me leaving the witnesses, that car and that steering wheel could be likened to me and my free will, or even that sometimes my parents' free will, because it's, like I mentioned, it was born into it at time. But I also made choices along the way. I exercised my free will and going out in service all the way up until my own dedication and baptism. So again, that car was like that steering wheel was like your free will, and that rail was kind of like God's plan,
Right.
and that paved road was like God's wisdom and mercy. So whenever you would find yourself off of God's plan, which was that center rail, I would hit a big bang and a big bump. And to be honest, leaving the witnesses was the biggest bang I ever had in my life.
Yes.
It was
Yes. It affected so many different areas of our life. Our marriage, the judicial system took over our lives. The excommunication was especially hard when we had to go through periods of that in our marriage. So,
absolutely. So reminding myself that even though I hit that rail, that basically this whole entire paved road was God's love, wisdom, and mercy was allowing me to get back to his original purpose. I mean, I wasn't stranded. I had no reason to sit there and be bitter that my journey took me through this path because, again, the Bible lets us know that, all things,
all things work together.
right. And we have to have faith in that. So even going through the witnesses, even that little detour, hitting that rail, which was like a 30-year rail, I was
Right.
there for my entire life.
Right.
But, it was still, I have to look at it in God's timetable. I can't look at it and be, mad at him or think that he didn't care. No, he has a purpose and he has a plan in mind. And he also extended me the grace and wisdom and mercy to, eventually to hear his call and to come following, to give me a
Amen.
humble heart that was humble enough to leave after being in an organization for so long. I mean, he gifted you with the exact same thing.
It was especially hard because, I remember growing up when my parents had periods of inactivity, they were still very much born. I mean, even though they weren't born in Jehovah's Witnesses, they were very much indoctrinated, and so they pushed the governing body's agenda, whatever it was at the time, off on us. Whether it was going out in service for 60 hours and for
ever changing agenda,
yeah, or whatever it is, the theocratic goals or whatever it was for the service year, and that was especially hard going to the meetings without my parents, but I felt like I was doing a service and a work for God.
Mm-hmm.
And my parents pushed us to go to the meetings, even though when they did not. My mother went through a period of severe depression after my uncle was excommunicated, and she believed that he apostatized. It really took her to a very low place. So I always had that fear of never apostatizing, or as if that was the worst thing as getting disfellowship. So when I was excommunicated, it was especially hard for me because I thought that I had got over the idea that God was intertwined with the organization, because I was physically in but was mentally out for about 2 years before I left, or was excommunicated. But I still had this idea that I didn't want to lose my family and didn't want to lose everything, lose my family and lose my community and lose our connections and our, and social connections. And
so how do you separate that? How do you separate what is man's plan and what is God's plan and what's man's plan?
You know what? It is still a fight. It's still a fight. If I can understand what you're saying, you asking how do I separate what God's plan, that road that you were talking about, the plans of others, those who's trying to get behind the wheel and steer for you.
Right.
And if you're using that car illustration, I had to recognize that somebody else was behind the wheel. I thought I was behind the wheel. So I was even more blind than you were. I mean, in the sense that more indoctrinated than you were, because I thought I was in control, that I was actually steering. It wasn't until I realized that it was the governing body through my parents that were actually steering the wheel. Once I got my hand on the wheel, all I did was bump against the wheel. Oh, that's all I did. It was like I kind of, like, if I could liken it to an illustration, I'm not really great at illustration, but I love this scene in Batman where Bane tells Batman, how did it go? You believe, darkness.
I don't know. He was so hard to understand.
Right, with the muffle. But basically, I was born in the darkness.
Okay.
And that's how I felt with my parents. I resented the fact that they made an active choice to go into this religion, whereas I felt like I was born in the darkness.
Okay, got you.
So when I had my hand on the wheel, not only did I have my hand on the wheel, but I was seeing light for the very first time, because I had felt like I was been in a bunker for all my life. So how I separated the God's plan from man's plan, first recognizing that the governing body had no place in my life dictating and making rules, serving in a place that where only Christ belongs. So that led me to ultimately re-examine the governing body's teachings, and I was able to find that they weren't founded on the Word of God. And once I was able to do that by God's grace, it was only by God's grace.
Yes.
Because and picking up a different Bible as you did.
Highly recommend it. Any of our witness friends that are either thinking about studying with the witnesses or either coming out of the witnesses, I encourage you wholeheartedly, absolutely, to read a different translation of the Bible. Growing up, I used NWT. I used the green one. I used the black one.
Right.
I had the gray one. I had the gray one monogrammed. I went to the special convention to personally pick up my copy, and I was proud. And I'm telling you that after reading multiple versions of the Bible, there are so many more easier, clearer, more understandable ways to get to know God and His purpose for this earth and our life. If I can give one other point of advice, is another way that I had to learn to avoid bitterness was I had to understand that God's wisdom was far greater than our own. From our limited viewpoint, it can look as though at times God has a predetermined or predestined a lot in our life, basically. That things, our life is basically predestined. But if we remember that God's thinking and his wisdom far exceeds our own, then the only way I can really describe it is if you, I don't know, if anybody's listening is familiar with chess, and you could think of just like an opening strategy where you move a central piece. Now, down the road, moving this piece may lead to a branch of moves that leads to a checkmate. Now, there was no way of you knowing that this one move would lead that, but if you wisely made moves from the first point on, then no matter what the outcome is, you would be in a great position to make a wise move. Well, even on a much greater scale, the wisdom of God, he always exercises and makes the perfect decision.
Amen.
So his wisdom is perfect, everlasting. It's not just, we don't just look at the Bible and see God's perfection and creation backwards. God's purpose is to bring us to perfection, is to bring us to him. So keeping that in mind, that first of all, that my life isn't predestined to turn out some way, that this, me being in witnesses, was a result of free will. My parents exercised free will. Right. I exercised a measure of free will. And now I had to exercise another measure of free will to be obedient and humble enough to hear his voice and come out. And again, to be honest, having my entire family in there and still active and still preaching and still, tugging at my heartstrings, it's been hard. It's been very difficult. It's been straining on my friendships and on my family, and it can bring you into a period of depression if you don't focus on God's goodness, if you don't focus on his mercy and him giving you a chance to come into an accurate knowledge of him.
And that's the key. I think that's one of the things that helped me avoid becoming bitter to the point that I just walked away from God altogether. I think I just stayed in his word. I just began to read the Bible for myself, be able to make the truth my own, but in a different way. Not in a different way, but not in the way that they meant it. But to be able to dig in God's word, to be able to draw comfort from examples like Paul, who left and was, left his former religion to be able to proclaim the good news of Christ. And remembering that what we lose in this world, that we gain for Christ. And whatever we lose, I think the scripture that talks about whether our mother or our father, if our mother or our father should leave us, that the Lord himself will take them up. And the other scripture that talks about where if you should leave a mother or brother or father or sister for my sake, that you would gain, more brothers and sisters than fathers. Now we're in that season where I think we're experiencing it, or about to experience that. So in our upcoming videos, I hope you enjoyed this, because
yes,
this is our first video. We've never done anything like this, but we just felt so moved by other experiences that we wanted to start off a little series to try to talk about our experience about breaking the chains of indoctrination.
So why don't you say what you got coming up? Well, let me go first because I don't have as much coming up.
Okay.
Again, I have STZ's Men's Corner. There's a focus on topics that deal with a lot of men's issues, as well as family head issues. But again, it's not just limited to men. But again, that's my focus. So, man, you can look forward to that. Also, we'll have a few more videos coming out, which reminds me I have to edit this one.
Right.
So I have that coming up. And how about you?
We are going to continue our series again. It's Gracefully Broken. We're going to talk about in our next upcoming video about how organization affected our marriage. We were very recently, up until very recently, on the brink of divorce. And I think it's a topic that is least talked about, how the removal of the governing body from the center of our marriage and policing our marriage, how that greatly affected us. It's my strong belief that witnesses begin to first realize that something is wrong with the organization when they go through the judicial system and see how men are actually handling affairs, and that really is no Holy Spirit involved. Mm-hmm. And then ultimately, I guess the last video of the series would be what led us ultimately to think about going to a church, which is super taboo for Jehovah's Witnesses. If you're not familiar with
dun, dun, dun.
Right, if you're not familiar with Jehovah's Witnesses, you can be excommunicated for going to a different church or visiting a different fellowship. So that is taboo. But we wanted to talk about how we move from works oriented mindset to grace. Well, that's all for us here at Healing for the Soul Ministry. Again, check out our new articles that are about our experiences, and you can find a lot of them under the Reflections of an Ex-Jehovah's Witness. Is a category there, as well as other articles that God has placed on our hearts to share with other people.
And if you guys have any tips or comments, please pass them along for us.
Right,
we
like
would
the
love
video,
any
dislike the video, whatever. We
absolutely
love
anything we're doing wrong, let us know.
Yeah. So again, you can like us or dislike us below.
Please like us.
Or leave us some comments to give us some feedback about upcoming videos if you have questions. And I guess that's basically it.
All right, everybody, take care and God bless.
Keep yourselves in God's love.